I'd like to introduce Phil Harrington, our presenter this morning. He's been a member of HASP for about 12 years. And Phil spent 7 years living in the Caribbean. He graduated from high school in Puerto Rico. Work projects took him to Haiti and to Cuba. Phil has a BA from George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and an MA and Masters of Divinity from the Pacific School of Religion. He has a background in historical research and has taught in a variety of settings. Phil enjoys expressing his eclectic nature through class presentations, such as The Big Read, The Gospel of Mark, and kayaking. So please welcome Phil Harrington.
So far. Only one quibble I have with that. I'm not sure that I have a background in historical research, other than what you do when you go through graduate school and do stuff. And that probably no more than anyone else here.
Pardon.
That's all right. I just didn't want to set you up. I do thank you, Pat and Gloria, and all of you for your interest, and you folks listening in at home. We can't see you, but we know you're there, and we're happy about that. We have an item of business to take care of first, because, of course, we missed a class last week because of weather. And here are the options for making up that class. And so you don't have to think about it yet. You don't have to decide, but one of your index cards is for that purpose, so that you can give your preference. The first would be the week after the second class, have the third class on Monday, February 12 at 9:30, or on Thursday, February 15 at 9:30. And then the third option would be we just not worry about making up the class. Just it will probably extend the second session by 30 minutes, but we'll cut down the content so that we don't that you would not need to come to a third session. Anyway, so those are the options. You don't have to think about it yet, but by the end of the class, at the end of the class, if you want to think about it and turn in a card, that would be helpful. And folks at home can email if they have a preference, if they have a strong preference. I would like to, though, begin with a story. It's January 1969, so exactly 55 years ago. A boy is growing up in Western Michigan who has spent his whole childhood without ever experiencing a culture other than his own. He has just turned 13. And this fact about his lack of cultural exposure is about to change. He's grown up in Western Michigan in 1969 is still pretty much a monoculture. The boy has only gone to one Tigers game across the state where there is any diversity of culture or even skin color. But this is about to change. The boy's father decides to take him along on an unexpected trip to Haiti. Except for one visit to Canada. He's never even left the country. He's never even flown on an airplane. So he wakes up early that January morning with the excitement of a new adventure. The short flight to Chicago alone is thrilling. The third and final plane of the day leaves Miami and lands in Port-au-Prince in the early evening. Still light. Up to this point, as I mentioned, the boy has had no experience or encounter with many people at the same time, or even at once, with a skin color darker than his own. But suddenly, A sea of rich ebony faces rolls over him like a wave in the crowded airport. He doesn't have a word for it yet, but this is a culture shock. A second wave immediately follows. Everybody is speaking all at once and loudly, but he can't understand a word of what they are saying. It's a cacophony of confusion. He is wondering whether it's too late to turn around and go back to Michigan. Does his father even know how to handle this situation? He has never been to Haiti either. But someone has expected them and drives them through the busy streets, cars, overflowing trucks everywhere, all this honking. People nearly hit, it seems to him. They stop to eat at a strange restaurant. He's never seen a restaurant like this before. And strange food is served. And yet another shock wave. He needs to use the restroom. But getting there, he finds out there's no way to flush the toilet. There's no handle. How does he flush the toilet? The waiter, he gets back to the table and finds out the waiter flushes the toilet for you with a bucket? By the time they leave the restaurant, it is already dark. And this big city has no lights, so there is not much else to see that he can react to until they arrive up in the mountains about an hour away, or shortly, just about an hour away, at a small guest cottage where they will spend the first night. There is another person there he does not know. Although the cottage seems isolated to the boy, his father says that there is a missionary who lives nearby, someone that he would like to make contact with yet that night, so they can get started with some business in the morning. He's told not to worry. It'll just be about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. Even though he's just turned 13, he already knows how to interpret that. It's been a long day, his father says, just go to sleep. But the boy can't. The stranger in the cottage has gone to sleep. An hour goes by. The third hour has just begun when a storm breaks out. Thunder, lightning, and rain. Oh, so much rain. He's never heard rain on a tin roof before. It's like the world is coming to an end. Glancing out the window, all he sees is darkness, but he can hear the sheets of water falling on the ground. At about the fourth hour, the rain stops, but still no father. Where can the boy go? Nowhere. He doesn't even know where he is. What can he do? He has never been in this kind of predicament before. Nothing around him connects him to his known world. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to him, his father and the missionary have set out in a car to make contact with a third person and have gotten caught by the storm. A flash flood, which he will learn is called a lavala, rushes down the dirt road and begins to lift the car. They jump out to prevent being washed down the mountain. They find refuge under the roof of a stranger's porch, but they can do nothing but wait either. In the middle of the night, the father returns to find the boy trying his best to deny the near terror that has gripped him. He is trying instead to show casual relief. And finally, he falls deeply asleep. He wakes up in the morning to the music of roosters and cowbells. They are the harbingers not only of a new day, but of a new world. a new awareness of the largeness, the diverse beauty of the world. Perhaps because the boy's culture shock the evening before was so intense and accompanied by such fear that he feels no trace of it in the morning. As if it has been washed down the mountain with the lava. All that remains is the excitement. His quickly out the door to see what was only a dark mystery hours previously, a lush green valley. Yes, a cow, but mostly it's goats ringing those bells. There are roosters and hens, occasionally a donkey. The valley is dotted with small wooden shacks. From them emerge surprising numbers of people in colorful clothes, going about the morning's business. Something in the experience of this morning is stirring the boy's soul in a way he is unaccustomed to. As if he never knew the world was this beautiful or this large. Two girls with faces of that ebony arrive to make breakfast, and their smiles win him over instantly. They speak and laugh, and the words that struck him as cacophony the night before are as inviting as poetry, as music. By the end of the day, they have traveled back down to the coast and 12 miles across the sea in a small open boat to the island of La Gonave, arguably the most remote and poorest rural region of Haiti. And still he is overwhelmed by the love in smiles, still amazed by the abundance of contagious laughter, and still he greets each new experience as an adventure. The excursion by donkey into the island's interior, where a whole village came out to laugh at them in their skin color. By the end of the week, he doesn't want to leave. He begs his father to schedule a return trip. He knows he is leaving the country a more educated, a much richer person than the scared boy who arrived just a week earlier. He will get his wish, making 2 more and longer visits to this amazing place. He will learn the tragic history of a nation never truly allowed to be a nation. The boy grows up not telling this story very often. He is not sure people will believe such a radical change in perspective can happen literally overnight. He knows it all sounds a bit idealistic, but he can never forget the experience. He knows it has marked him for life and changed the way he lives his life. For one thing, at this early age, he was allowed to meet people living with challenges surpassing any he has ever since encountered. This in what anthropologists call the poorest place in the hemisphere. Yet in the very same people, he has discovered a degree of joy surpassing any he has since encountered. At this early age, he was given proof that the many promises of happiness and standard of life that television and other authorities were throwing at him were utter lies. Above all, he sees in this early experience a rich gift given to him by a people from whom so much has been taken by force. It's not just that he feels indebted, but he knows that it is a gift that Haiti continues to give to many over the years, and believes it bears a clue not only to the resilient survival of the Haitian people, but to the best hope for the rest of the world as well. By now, you probably gathered I'm telling a personal story. I chose to begin with this story because it reflects the subtitle of the class. This is a personal experience, and one of the obvious characteristics and limitations. The personal encounter doesn't mean that this is going to be a travelogue. or any account of my personal experiences in the region. That would not be of much educational value to you. But it is inevitably flavored by my perspective. And the fact that I don't come to present this class as a historian, an anthropologist, a sociologist, or a cultural expert of any kind, but as an interested and somewhat invested student. What I can provide is a framework to put the news you may hear into a perspective that you don't have to accept unquestionably, but that might just open some doors of exploration for you. For all practical purposes, the islands we will be looking at are just as close to us as Canada or Mexico. Yet they seem a world away, especially the island closest to us. So our connection to these islands is often surprising. Questions will be important. We may not always get time at the end to pass the microphone around, but questions are going to be shaping this. So you have more than the one index card. And anytime during the class, you can write down another question so that you can at least turn them in and they will shape the next session. We'll get them, if we can't today, to the next day. Since questions are important, we also start with a quiz. You have this sheet in front of you where you can write down your answers. So that part will be easy. The quiz won't necessarily be that easy. You don't have to worry about it. There's no grade unless you want to make bets, wagers with your neighbors. I don't expect you to know everything. I'm hoping that you don't know all the answers to these questions. Yeah, I put some plants in there, some questions that you will know the answer to, so that you don't feel completely unprepared. And the first question, answer just A or B. What is it? Caribbean or Caribbean? Those accent marks aren't actually in the word. They're just there to distinguish between the pronunciations. So you can decide what's appropriate, the Caribbean or Caribbean. Second, since I think that this class was scheduled for January because it might attract some people who were hoping for a vacation in the tropics this winter, but aren't going to be able to do it. So this is an alternative. But suppose you were taking a trip to the Caribbean. I want you to play travel agent just a bit here. And you find that there is a plane leaving from Detroit at the same time that there's a plane leaving for Chicago. But they get you're going to Puerto Rico in this case. But you're going to San Juan via different cities. If you go to New York, you go through New York City. And if you go through Chicago, you go to Miami. Now, even though the distance to Detroit from your home may be just a little bit longer, Chicago, of course, is a whole traffic experience. So I'm trusting those equal out. Just take the travel by car out of the equation to make it a little bit easier. Or pretend you have an Uber driver who's going to take you to either place. But if you don't like to spend time traveling, which route do you take? Okay. Which route are you going to take to San Juan if you don't like spending time traveling? And we're going to ignore the waitovers, catching the other flight. Those will be identical. Our planes are going to be perfectly on time, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay. All right. Question number 3. What 2 countries share an island? And you get extra credit if you know the name of that island. So I'll put down just the name. You don't even have to spell the name of the country right, just so you know. And the name of the island, if you do also know that. Okay, here's a question I didn't think you'd be prepared for. I have taken linguistics, but I'm not been an expert necessarily. Which country's capital is a linguistic cognate, in other words, identically linguistically, to the name of a city in the US state of Georgia? Okay. Which of the countries we will be talking about has a capital that has a linguistic cognate in the state of Georgia? Basically, won't be spelled exactly the same, but basically the same word, same meaning. Which country, this is number 5 now, which country was the second in the Western Hemisphere to gain its independence from Europe? In other words, the first country after the United States, colonies, to gain their independence. Which country was the second? Was it one of these listed, or was it something outside? Second people to gain their independence from Europe. Now, you get to, I don't know if the countries would like this or the people to do it, but you get to pin a dictator on a country. Number 6 would be Fulgencio Batista. Number 7 would be Duvalier. And question number 8 is Trujillo. Just put down the letter or the name of the country. And I use country, I think I remember in the future put it in parentheses because one of those places isn't technically a country. Ready? Well, this is a little bit more fun. Place the athlete in their country. Roberto Clemente, Usain Bolt, Jose Contreras, Albert Pujols or Pujols. I don't know how he pronounces it in this country. Hopefully, even if you're not a baseball fan, you've heard of some of these names, or there's one of them up there that's not a baseball player. And don't spend too much time on it, because I've got some more. If you didn't know those, maybe you know more. Maybe you know about Felipe Alou, and I've stuck a couple Detroit Tigers in there. Javier Baez, Willie Hernandez, and Andy Ibanez. If you don't know and just want to make a guess, that will count too. Okay. I've got some more athletes. Patrick Ewing, Orlando Cepeda, Barbara Pierre. Had to get a woman in there. I felt a little bit guilty. And Ivan Rodriguez. Even if you don't know these athletes very well, there are clues in the names that you might pick up on. Okay. Speaking of baseball, though, most foreign players in Major League Baseball, come from where? And this is not just our region that we're talking about, but just the most foreign players in Major League Baseball. Where do they come from? I was going to put an other up there. I didn't, so you can't be tempted to think it was Japan. You might think it was Japan, and it may eventually be Japan, but not at the moment. Okay, place the celebrity in their country for the who are not sports fans. Rita Moreno, Grace Jones, Ricky Martin, and I put 2 there together just to give you added both Benicio and Benicio del Toro and Jose Ferrer come from the same place. Depending on the movies you watch, you'll be familiar with some of those. Okay. Some more celebrities. Spice. Where does she come from? Pablo Casals and Lin-Manuel Miranda, and I have them italicized. I'll tell you why later. Then Bob Marley. Okay. Some more celebrities. Jose Feliciano, Wycliffe Jean, Raoul Peck, and Bad Bunny. Just for someone who's really on the top of the charts right at present. I was taxing your memory from some of those other people. Bad Bunny, you need to know about contemporary culture. Okay, it looks like some of those of you started writing. Okay, now place the style of music in its country. Reggae, plena, huaracha, and mambo. Hoping you'll get at least one of those right. Maybe two. Okay, I'm going to move on. We've got some more styles of music. Bomba, merengue, ska, and compa. I don't expect you've spent much time listening to all of these. Only one of those, to be honest, has made it very popular in this country. So I'll move right on. Some of you may impress your neighbors. Guajira, danzón, samba, and tango. Now notice here I've added a letter. It's probably too much of a giveaway. There may be one there or so that don't come from the islands. So if you find one of those, it would be F or other. You don't even have to know where it comes from. You just have to know it doesn't come. How's your literary knowledge? Where does Jose Marti come from? He lived in this country for a while. Wasn't born here, but became known. Edwige Dantica, you may have encountered in recent years, as well as Julia Alvarez. And I don't know for sure if Julia pronounces her name Julia or Julia. I forget. And then Victor Hernandez Cruz, I did him a disfavor. He would never abbreviate his, it's not a middle initial, that's part of his last name. Victor Hernandez Cruz. And Chiara Alegria Udes. They both come from the same place. Okay, what famous American author had a favorite hangout in Michigan as well as in Cuba? I will beg your indulgence here. I will pronounce some Spanish words and places and names closer to as they might pronounce them, but I won't be consistent. And I find when I'm talking, if I keep talking about Cuba instead of Cuba, that people think I'm being pretentious or something, or just strange or weird. So, okay, speaking of names of places, what is the present name of these places? Yeah. IET, Quisqueya. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't. I don't know why I didn't put the options there. Borinquen, and I don't know how this is pronounced. Something like Jaimaka is what I would guess. Jaimaka. That's how the Spanish pronounced what they were hearing. Your guesses on these are probably going to be pretty good. Now, Columbus gave these names to which places? So do you know another name, a present name, or another name for these that Columbus gave to different islands? All these are islands. La Isla Española, San Jago, and San Juan. You know what those islands are called now. Okay, so here's something visual. Which flag, see those kind of similar flags, which flag belongs to Puerto Rico? You need a clue. There's a mural right here downtown that has the flag. Which one is it? A or B? Okay. Until 1987, all Major League Baseballs were made where? Number 60. If you're up to the numbers. Number 60. Which president in the region we're talking about, I won't pronounce and give you the answer yet, did the United States officially attempt to assassinate? This is officially. This is an official. This is in the documents. Which president did our government officially attempt to assassinate? And then number 61, which US president was nearly assassinated by dissidents in the region we are talking about in this class? And by nearly assassinated, I mean there was an incident, an actual incident, a shooting incident. It wasn't just a thought or a plan. Okay, 62. What food is not indigenous to the islands we were talking about? And that's including all of those islands. What food is not indigenous? Was not being grown when Europe landed. See if you can find one. There might be more than one. See if you can find at least one that did not originally come from this place. Have one? Okay. You know, in English, we use a lot of words that we've taken over from Native Americans. But some from places other than North America. Okay. The Tainos were the indigenous people to our region that we're discussing, to the islands we are discussing. Can you find a word there that you think came not from continental Native Americans, but came from the islands? Can you find a word in that list? Came from the Taino people. Ready? In which country can you visit the largest fortress in the Americas? By fortress, I mean, you know, the historical old style stones built up, you know, not the, I don't mean a modern military base or anything like that. But the largest one, not just in the islands, but the largest one in the whole hemisphere. The 63, 64. Okay. All right. Hope you can figure that out. Sorry. Puerto Rico was known as having the world's largest. Which of these? Again, there may be more than one, and I say was known as because I'm not sure right now. Total miles of beaches per capita. The world's largest radio telescope. The world's largest JCPenney store. The world's largest snake population per square mile. Which is true, or was true at least, of Puerto Rico? Okay. Why might you recognize these places? Now here, all you have to write down a word or two, just so that you know, oh yeah, identify this place with something. Arecibo, El Yunque, Bahía de Cochinos, Guantánamo, Vieques. Why might you recognize? You don't have to say where it is, but just why might you have heard of it? Just a word. You don't have to prove that you know about the subject matter, but just you have an inkling. I go on? Okay. Our last questions are true and false. So a little bit easier. True or false questions about Puerto Rico. Number 71, most Puerto Ricans want the island to become a state, a U.S. state. True or false? '72, Puerto Ricans are already U.S. citizens. True or false? '73, Puerto Ricans do not pay federal taxes. True or false? 74, Puerto Ricans are liable for the military draft, the US draft, military draft. 75. In 1917, the island began electing its own governor. True or false? I should probably give you a clue that Puerto Rico, U.S. took over ownership of Puerto Rico in the Spanish Civil War of 1898. So 76, Puerto Ricans have representation in the U.S. Congress. True or false? And number 77, Puerto Ricans can vote for U.S. president. True or false? And that is it. The reason you don't have to be worried about your performance is that some of these questions do have surprise answers, but there is to give if it's raised some questions, that's also good. It's to give you an idea of where kind of some of the places we are going or could go in our discussions. So again, this was not to intimidate you. I think you might be impressed about your knowledge. First of all, is it Caribbean or Caribbean? And of course, the answer is either one. So you got that one right. You start with a right answer. Whatever you answered is correct. It's pronounced both ways. My guess would be that Caribbean is more British, because they seem to like to have as few accented syllables as possible. And Caribbean only has one, and Caribbean has one, and then it's minor accent. So, but either one is possible. The people who live there, except for in Jamaica, wouldn't say either of those. They would say El Caribe, or Les Caribe, I think. I don't pronounce French very well. Les Caribe, Les Caribe. Les Caribe. You might be able to do a better job with it. The answer to your travel thing is Detroit through New York will get you to San Juan quicker than going to Chicago, from Chicago to Miami to San Juan. You might think you're all going south one direction and you're taking a detour, go all the way over to New York City, which isn't very far south of us. But here's the answer. Here's the map. Which of these islands is Puerto Rico, where you find San Juan? This is Puerto Rico over here. This is Miami over here. The island closest to us is 90 miles south, which is Cuba. That's not Puerto Rico. Look to see how Puerto Rico, and I can't help you out on you have to try find it on your own at home. The smallest of the islands, we're talking about the same size as Jamaica over there underneath Cuba, but Puerto Rico is the darker island there. It's about, maybe even a little bit more east than it is south, but it's at least twice as far east as it is south. So your flight is mostly east from Miami. Miami is west of us. Well, no, I was going to first do this from Washington, D.C. It's west of Washington, D.C. Miami is not very far east from us. In fact, when you go to Chicago, you're going west. So you're starting out further away than what you were. So if you take the orange lines go from Chicago to Miami to San Juan, and the green line goes from Detroit to New York, that flight from New York to San Juan is not much longer than the flight from Miami. I used average flight times, just a table that had average flight times, and this, everything is kind of, there might be more than distance that's involved here. To be honest, you don't, it's a toss-up, you know, time-wise, if you're actually going, is pretty much a toss-up. But I wanted to stress the fact of how far east Puerto Rico is. If you put those two lines, mash them up together, you'll find the orange line is longer than the green line. Because we have this mentality that, well, it's south of us. The Caribbean is south of us, you know? And so that's going down south is where we simplify things that way. When in actuality, that flight from Miami to San Juan is a lot longer than you'd expect. It's a lot longer than the trip from Miami to Havana. On one of my trips to Cuba, I went through Miami. The others were through Mexico. But when we flew from Miami, it was a United Airlines flight. It had been chartered, mostly for Cuban nationals who are up here visiting their relatives, that kind of thing. But you just go up and then right back down again. So I wanted to stress that Cuba is close, Puerto Rico is not as close as we think. What two countries share an island? Haiti and Dominican Republic share the island that is generally called Hispaniola. And that was in another part of the question. Columbus called it La Isla Española, and that just got kind of shortened to Hispaniola, which is basically an abbreviation of La Isla Española. And that's the island that you see divided there between two colors. Haiti on the left and the Dominican Republic on the right. So there's the map I wanted to show you. Number 4, which country's capital is a linguistic cognate of a city in Georgia? Havana, Cuba, La Habana, Cuba, and Savannah, Georgia are basically the same places. Linguistically, I can't explain it, but the H and the S being interchangeable is explanatory. And it means the same thing. It's the same kind of geographic term of some kind of plain, flat terrain area. But Havana, Cuba, and Savannah, Georgia are the same place, in a manner of speaking. Which country was the second in the Western Hemisphere to gain its independence from Europe? And that would be Haiti. Did most of you get that? Mm-hmm. Okay, the second and roughly around the turn of the century, it's kind of questionable. It wasn't an easy, it wasn't as a clear cut of an independence as our country, but Haiti was the country there. The dates usually given are either 1903 or 1904, but the war for independence started just before the turn of the century. Pin the dictator on the country. Fulgencio Batista belongs to Cuba, Francois Duvalier to Haiti, and Rafael Trujillo to the Dominican Republic. By the end of the class, you will be more familiar with your dictators, whether you wanted to or not. Roberto Clemente, number 9, should be A. Puerto Rico, Usain Bolt comes from Jamaica. He's a runner, track star. Jose Contreras comes from, was a baseball star, coming from Cuba. And Albert Pujols, from the Dominican Republic. Hey. Felipe Alou comes from the Dominican Republic as well. Javier Baez and Willie Hernandez both come from Puerto Rico, so the 14 and 15 should be A. And Andy Ibanez comes from Cuba. Number 16 should be B. And Patrick Ewing was born in Jamaica. Orlando Cepeda and Ivan Rodriguez, number 18 and 20, both should be A for Puerto Rico. They come from Puerto Rico. Do you remember Orlando Cepeda? He's not as famous as Roberto Clemente, but they both played for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I went to school with Orlando Cepeda's son. But he was in like second grade when I started in ninth grade. Same school, same basically building, but two different wings. So we didn't hang out. I just Barbara Pierre is a track star from Haiti. I was not familiar with her until I made this quiz, so don't feel bad if you didn't know. And Ivan Rodriguez also comes from Puerto Rico, who was a home run king a while back. I don't know if he still is. Most foreign baseball players come from the Dominican Republic, by far. The Dominican Republic is a baseball factory. You look at the list, and it's very, very impressive. And Japan will have to do a lot to catch up. Place the celebrity in their country. 22, 24, and 25 should be A. Rita Moreno and Ricky Martin and Benicio and Jose both all come from Puerto Rico. Grace Jones from Jamaica. Known mostly by her hairstyle, but she was not a bad actress. Spice also comes from Jamaica. So 26 should be C. Pablo Casals and Lin-Manuel Miranda, 27, 28 should be A, although they were not born there. Pablo Casals adopted Puerto Rico as his home country when he exiled himself from Spain to get away from Franco, the dictator Franco, and chose the island of Puerto Rico to make his home. And Lin-Manuel Miranda was born in New York City, but his parents were both born in Puerto Rico. And Bob Marley, of course, I hope you all got from Jamaica. Got to place in Jamaica. Jose Feliciano comes from Puerto Rico, 30 is A. Wycliffe Jean, a singer and founder of the band Fugees. You're familiar with the Fugees? Comes from Haiti. So does Raoul Peck, filmmaker. He's made 3 films that have gotten pretty good. The one that you really need to see, he did a biopic of Karl Marx, the young Karl Marx, recently. But his film, I Am Not Your Negro, is a film that every American should see. Raoul Peck from Haiti. And Bad Bunny, of course, comes from Puerto Rico. He uses an English name, but he does not sing in English. And he still reaches the top of the charts in pop music. Reggae comes from Jamaica. Of course, I think you probably already got that and tied in with Bob Marley. Plena is street music that comes from Puerto Rico. Sometimes it's thrown into that category of salsa. You've probably heard a song or two without not knowing it. And guaracha and mambo both come from Cuba, from the island of Cuba. In fact, if you had to guess on any of those I list, if it was Spanish, you could guess Cuba, you're probably right, except for this page here. Bomba is mountain music from Puerto Rico. And you've probably also heard some songs too that are at least influenced by that rhythm, by that beat. Merengue comes from Dominican Republic. Ska comes from Jamaica. And different rock bands in this country really got into ska. The one that came from out of Boston, what was that called? Not remember the name, but they picked up came under the influence of ska music. More recent than reggae. And compa comes from Haiti. You've probably never heard anything that from the compa style. Guajira and danzón come from Cuba. In fact, mambo is related to danzón. canzone has more of the European flavor yet. Guajira. Did anyone guess that because of the song? Joan Baez and a number of other folk singers sang a song that is technically Guajira. In fact, it has, and the reason I thought you might remember is it has the word Guajira in it. Yo soy un hombre sincero, de donde crece la palma. Coming back. Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera, Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera. Sounding a little bit familiar? Yeah, I didn't do it justice, but samba comes from Brazil, so it should be other. And tango comes from Argentina. Okay, literary figures. Jose Marti is Cubano, is Cuban, and was a poet. In fact, he wrote the poem that Yo soy un hombre sincero, that I just sang. He wrote the poem that song is based on. But he also was an essayist and historian, and again wrote some things that we should probably pay attention to, even though he's long time dead. He fought for independence of Cuba when Cuba was still under Spain. Edwige Dandicat wrote Big Read a few years back. She's from Haiti. Julia Alvarez grew up in this country, but she was born in the Dominican Republic. And Victor Hernandez Cruz, who Life magazine named one of the 50 best American poets, is from Puerto Rico, as well as Chiara Alegria Ules, who I did not know. But she was surprised to learn that she was the one who wrote the play. She's a playwright. She maybe wrote short stories as well, but she wrote the play that got turned into the movie In the Heights. First of all, the musical and then the movie In the Heights, which is very recently been on Broadway. What famous American author had a favorite hangout in Michigan and Cuba? Hemingway. I've been to his hangout in Cuba, but never the one up in northern Michigan. I would like to go sometime. The present name of Haiti is Haiti. You may have guessed that is where the word Haiti comes from. There is some question about whether that was very regional or whether they used IT for the whole island. I think they used IT for the whole island, but Quisqueya was also a name given to the whole island that is now Hispaniola, Quisqueya, and you'll find that used still a lot. Haiti, the Haitians will use Haiti as the name of their country. Quisqueya is only used more kind of nostalgically on restaurants and things like that. Borinquen is the original name, or what the Taino is called Puerto Rico. And you'll find a lot of Puerto Ricans going back to that and calling themselves Boricua after the island. And Jamaica that's another spelling of Jamaica. Jamaica and Jamaica. Jamaica as well, the Spanish would say it. And of course, I explained this. La Isla Española is what Columbus called, what we call Hispaniola. And San Jago is what he called Jamaica. And the San Juan was the name that he placed on the island we now call Puerto Rico. For a long time, San Juan Bautista was the name of the island. And Puerto Rico, which means rich port, was the name of the city. And that makes sense. The city of San Juan is a port. It was rich port. And I forget now why they switched, but it did get switched around. So now San Juan is the name of the city and Puerto Rico is the name of the island. And at one time, when the US took over, they spelled it with an O instead of a UE. So instead of Puerto Rico, they did a more English version of Puerto Rico, but that did not last. That got changed back to the original Spanish version. Puerto Rico. Which flag belongs to Puerto Rico? It's the one on the right. You got it? Good. And where's the flag? Where does the flag belong on the left? Same flag with slightly different colors. That's the flag of Cuba. That's the Cuban flag. On the number A is Cuba, B is Puerto Rico. Until 1970, all Major League Baseballs were made in Haiti. Yep, sewn by hand by Haitian seamstresses. Good time. Different places, still outside this country, as far as I know. But I think Spalding used to make all of them. Maybe they still do have but Spalding has a couple different factories, and it was political unrest that caused them to move. But they had to go to some place where they had to pay a little bit more for their baseballs than the Haitian women were willing to sew them for, spend all day sewing. We'll talk about that a little bit more. We officially, by government action, tried to assassinate Fidel Castro. It's identified with the Kennedy administration. However, it actually began in the Eisenhower administration. Eisenhower didn't want to pay much attention to the whole issue, and so he turned it all over to Richard M. Nixon, his vice president. And Richard Nixon was the first to try to get some plans in operation to assassinate Fidel. And which U.S. president was nearly assassinated by a Caribbean or Caribbean dissidents? And that would be Harry Truman. There is no longer a known or well, there's not a major functioning military independence group, a violent independence group. There is an independence party, political party in Puerto Rico, but at one time there was a more ambitious wing of folks. And when they had scheduled some disruptions, some major protest uprisings, both in the islands and in this country, that didn't go well. If authorities got wind of them and shut them down, some of these dissidents were frustrated, and so they threw together a quick plan. When Truman was having to reside in the Blair House across the street from the White House, they tried to take advantage of that, and he was shot at. But the gunman was not very accurate in his aim. What food is not indigenous? Here, you have a big choice. You had a choice of 7. 7 of the 8, or do I have 8? Yeah, 8. 7 of the 8 are not indigenous. There's only one food on there that is indigenous to the Caribbean, and that's D, the sweet potato. So if you put anything other than D, you got it right. The sweet potato is the only thing on that list that is not indigenous, that was not found there when the Europeans arrived. Europeans brought all the other fruit there, and basically for export. They brought them to the Caribbean so that they could be grown there by cheap labor and shipped off to the US or to Europe. Except for breadfruit, that was brought in from, I think, the Philippines. It was brought in because it's a very inexpensive thing to grow, and they could feed it to the slaves. So it was brought in as slave food. But all the others were introduced for export purposes. So the question should have been, what food is indigenous to the Caribbean? And that would be the sweet potato. The Tainos had a wonderful way of growing them in mounds. They had developed a good system of agriculture, sustainable agriculture, and the garden part of that was there was also yucca, but the sweet potato was the mainstay. Which of these words do we receive from the Taino? Here again is a bonus point because you got it right. All of them, all of those words come from the Taino Indians in the Caribbean. I have not yet learned whether, because the most, when I identify with other places, other Indians, is maize or maíz. what the Spanish would have heard as maíz. And we anglicized to maize. I don't know whether the North American continental Indians actually had the same word for it, or whether the Spanish, since they first landed in the Caribbean before they went anywhere else, where the Spanish, when they saw this stuff growing, they knew that the name was what they learned from the Taínos. And so there's a little research to be done on that. In which country can you visit the largest fortress in the Americas? That is in Haiti, Citadel, up in the mountains, as opposed to a lot of the Spanish forts were on the coast. Puerto Rico was known as having the world's largest, two possible answers there, largest radio telescope, which has fallen apart and they're not using it anymore. They don't need those large radio telescopes as much anymore. And also had the largest JCPenney store. I know that because when I was a senior in high school, I got a job there. And thanks to that job in the world's largest JCPenney, I got to put my Spanish into practice, and it became much more conversational than it had, because I went to a school of mostly Puerto Rican kids that wanted to learn English. So they jabbered to themselves, but whenever they talked to us few gringos, maybe about 10% of the school, they would always use English to practice, and I let them do it. So I think I'm very thankful for that job. Why might you recognize these places? Arecibo is where that radio telescope was. One of the world's best examples of karst topography outside of Yugoslavia and China is that northern coast, central northern coast of Puerto Rico. The town closest by that radio telescope is Arecibo, so it's sometimes called the Arecibo Observatory. El Junco is the only rainforest that the U.S. is in possession of. The U.S. National Park Service has one tropical rainforest, I should say. There's the other kind up in the northwest. The tropical rainforest, El Junque, on the eastern end of the island is our only rainforest. Bahia de Cochinos may be caught up on the Bahia's Bay. That's the Bay of Pigs, where our government tried to help some Cuban exiles immediately, have a resurgence. They found no support on the island. Right, so it didn't go anywhere. But in that further east, you come to Guantanamo, which is, of course, the U.S. base left over from the Spanish-American Civil War, and has become a prison. And Vieques is the island that the Navy used for bombing. It's off the coast, east coast of Puerto Rico, and so the military had both the western third and the eastern third of the island, and the people will strip in the middle, and they got tired finally of enduring all of the bombing and not being able to go on their island. There were we won't get into it now, but there was a big uprising and the popular support, and the Navy was compelled to leave. True or false? Most Puerto Ricans want the island to become a state. It's hard to tell. So you can say right for true or false. It's a good maybe. Probably leaning toward the true, because there was a referendum finally that showed where most of the people voted for becoming a state. There have been referendums or plebiscites for a good number of decades now, and they've generally all shown that the majority of people want to remain as they are, as a free associated state, not officially, not a colony. And some people even don't use the word territory. It's a Estado libre asociado is how it is in the Puerto Rican Constitution, a freely associated state, which is a slightly different relationship than other territories even that the U.S. has. And for the first time, just about a couple years ago, one of those referendums showed the majority voting for statehood. However, it was a disputed election, and the turnout was not nearly as much as turnouts had been. It's become a political tool on the island. There's one There's one party that favors statehood, and there's one party that the other major party favors remaining the same. And so that referendum sometimes gets used as a tool. The US Congress decided not to accept that last plebiscite, but to work with the Puerto Rican population on developing a more comprehensive referendum. And I think it's really the Congress that's done a good thing, because the political nature of those elections, those referendums before, they're making sure there's an educational component. They're going to spell everything out much more clearly. So there's a lot. We'll get into that a little bit more. So it's a toss-up right now. You can say that most Puerto Ricans did vote, but it was like only by 2 percentage points and only about a half the turnout. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, true. Puerto Ricans do not pay federal taxes, false. Now, that is true that in general, Puerto Ricans do not pay federal income tax unless you meet certain categories, like you work for the government or you work for a company outside of Puerto Rico. It could be a Japanese company, whatever. You earn your money outside of the island, you have to pay U.S. federal taxes on it. And of course, the excise taxes, Puerto Ricans get charged. And then the payroll taxes, the Social Security, and Medicare, that kind of thing. Those parts of the taxes Puerto Ricans pay. In fact, Puerto Rico generates more federal income via taxes than 6 of the states. 6 of the 50 states pay less, contribute less money to the government than the Puerto Rico does. And Puerto Ricans are liable for the draft. That is true. Also, if you did get drafted, if you're Puerto Rican, do get drafted, then you are in the category of the people that have to pay income tax. So you get drafted not in the military service, but into tax. Because if you work for the government, U.S. government, of course, you have to pay federal income tax. True or false? In 1917, the island began electing its own governor. False. 1917 is when Puerto Ricans became U.S. citizens. Right. And also where they become eligible for the draft. So the date 1917 might sound like a little suspicious. Some people feel that World War I was a factor in that decision in 1917. Puerto Rico was not allowed to elect its own governor until it was either 1947 or 1948. Now I'll get to that. We'll get that nailed down. But it was one of those 2 years, 47 or 48. Until then, governors were appointed by the Congress. Puerto Ricans have representation in the U.S. Congress. The answer is sorta. So you can, true or false, you can find a way to answer it. The island is represented by what they call a resident commissioner, who has a voice but not a vote, even on things that concern the island. So they can sit there and listen to everybody talk and debate about things, but they can't do anything about it. They can't vote. So some people say that's not really representation, and therefore they should not be taxed. Puerto Ricans can vote for the U.S. president. I put false, but actually that you could answer that true as well, because all a Puerto Rican would have to do to vote for the U.S. president is declare a residence in the States. You know, they have a relative there, so they're going to go live there for a few months and use that as an official address. They can vote. They can get a voter registration card. So yes, Puerto Ricans who live in this country can vote. But if they're living in Puerto Rico, they cannot vote. Both major parties are identified with the political party in this country and can send delegations to the conventions, the political conventions. And I think that those delegates can vote for the party's nominee. So in that sense, too, it could be true. Anyway, hopefully you got your curiosity piqued a little bit. Is it a question that we can wait till the end or to an index card? Right, because I do want to cover a little bit more, because in one sense, the Caribbean has not always been a multicultural place on Earth. This map shows different colors for the different countries, which helps us think of them as, because even as multicultural, because even the culture that developed in Dominican Republic is a little bit different from that which developed in the United States because of history. Same goes for Cuba. And Jamaica, of course, has the English influence, and Haiti, the French. But originally, relatively speaking, it was a lot more monocultural. There was one people that that kind of flavored the whole region. And anthropologists have found evidence of the first wave of migration of people into the region came from the Yucatan Peninsula, there on the left-hand side of the map. And they worked their way, I don't know exactly how far into the islands, but extensively. That was 4,000 years before Christ, BCE, 4,000 years BCE. And 2000 BCE, a different waves of migration began from the Orinoco Delta region of South America, and they came up the islands, the smaller islands. You can see how close they are together. Most of those you can see the next island, so it's not too hard. And plus, these folks had a good knowledge of the sea. So they migrated and kind of took over. This migration took over the remnants of the earlier migration. But notice there's 2,000 years between. We're talking long distance of time. The people who the Europeans found are called Taino, and their ancestors arrived in the region we're talking about, the main islands, Cuba, Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico, starting about 400 BCE, okay? And the culture was established as can be recognized by anthropologists somewhere around 900 BCE, AD, or 900 CE, or 1,000. So they were developed as a culture for at least 500 years before the Europeans landed. We're not quite 250 years, okay? Our culture, their culture was developed for 500 years before the Europeans arrived. If you've heard the name Arawak applied to the Indians of this region, of the Caribbean, or even the Antilles, cross it off your books, out of your books. There are a lot of books that still use the word Arawak. And one thing I want you can take home today is they're getting rid of that word. It's not appropriate. The Arawaks are Indians from the continent, and so they have common ancestry there, but there's no way, shape, and form that the Arawak culture came into the Caribbean, or at least survived very long. It is inappropriate to call these Indians Arawak as it would be to call Aztecs Incas, or Incas Aztecs. Okay, of course they all came down from from Siberia, of course, and made their way through. So they're all related somewhat, but they're very different people. Anthropologists find regions of Taino culture. They call classic Tainos the Indians on Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, and the eastern end of the island of Cuba. They identify as the bulk. There are a little bit of variations in the Taino populations as you get further into Cuba. They call those the Western, and Jamaica, the Western Taino. And then the Eastern Tainos are those islands in the yellow box. They call them the Eastern Tainos. On the way on the left, in the purple box, are what some people call the Guanahatabi, or Siboney, spelled with a C. And those words, sometimes they're interchanged. Some people say they're differences, but generally those folks are differentiated from the Taino, even though they may be related to the Taino. They argue about whether that has more of the Yucatan influence or not. It's hard to tell with no written languages. And all those years ago, it's really hard to be certain exactly who they are. But the blue box down the lower right-hand corner are where the Caribs basically hung out, and they made their way on raids. That's where we get the word Caribbean. Kind of unfortunate that Taínos got left out. They were a little bit more violent. They didn't think their women was pretty, so they raided the Taínos for the prettier women. They're known for their cannibalistic practice, which was not culinary, but it was more ritual. It was kind of symbolizing a victory over their enemies. But still, the name Carib comes from the same word that cannibal comes from. Anyway, the Taíno were discovered, in a sense, by Cristobal Colon, a man from Italy, whose name was originally Cristoforo Colombo. The Spanish called it, that he sailed for, called him Colon, Cristobal Colon. And he was the one to get first introduced. He led the expedition that first encountered the Taíno people. Anthropologists describe them as a peaceful culture, well-established villages that had a good government arrangement. We get the word cacique from them. And there were women who became caciques, chiefs of the villages. It was a very communal culture, and basically pacifist. They did start to defend themselves. And they practiced a very sustainable agriculture. They had a well-developed religion. And these are symbols, Taíno symbols on this banner up here. I think that they're all symbols for the sun, representing the sun. But you can look back in the archaeological books and find some of these same symbols on some artifacts. It's, anyway, this is how they became known. It's probably a little bit idealistic, but this is basically how they became known. But we find another description of them in Columbus's diary of 16 December 1942. They are fit to be ordered about and made to work, to sow, and do everything else that may be needed. Do you find a sense of foreboding in that? To be fair to Columbus, and he does get bashed a lot, he also described them in very glowing terms. He called them intelligent. They had a good memory. They were very curious, and they were very generous. We'll find out some of those stories of their generosity, even to Columbus. Columbus's description of them kind of changed after they decided not to be so ordered into being told what to do and how to live and how not to live. And when they started resisting, Columbus started calling them close to subhuman terms, but they were suddenly stupid and ignorant people. The Taíno population in 1492, this is a very conservative estimate. Some people say 5,000. And probably the truth is more closer to 3 million, I'm thinking 3 million. But I chose a very conservative figure of 2 million. 5 years later, there were about half. Then in 5 years, the population was decimated by half. In 1520, it was, and this is a more accurate figures, they did a census. So as best as they could tell, it was somewhere around 200,000 Taínos left in 1520. 1542, 50 years later, 200 is not a very good, it's just another, all these are estimates. 200 is not, can't rely on that figure, but that was what one person said, Bartolomé de las Casas. Provided that figure. It's a little bit hard to tell them because a lot of them were hiding now. But in some regions, the governor would say, we have none, we have zero. They turned their census forms back zero already, 14. And by 1555, somewhere around there, but 12 years later, they were technically extinct. No more, no trace of anybody full-blood Taíno left. Disease gets mentioned as one of the chief, was one of the chief causes, but I think it's really wrong to stop there because the Europeans not only had better diseases, stronger diseases, they had stronger weapons. So weapons, they were easy to kill when they put up a resistance. They just had to shoot them down, you know. They found other ways to kill them, but shooting them was very easy. Kill a lot at one time. Slavery is a large contributor to that decimation of the population, because they could no longer work in their gardens. They had to work full-time digging for gold for the Europeans, and their diet fell apart. Their agriculture fell apart in starvation. A lot of the Tainos starved just because they were not deemed, they could not be fed enough, you know, and they were dispensable, I suppose. Torture, they were tortured when they did not obey. Some of the stories are very hard to read, and a lot of them committed suicide. A lot of the Tainos population was decimated by suicide because they saw no reason to living. They killed their babies even when they were born. Why? They thought that was more humane than letting them grow up in the situation that they found themselves in. I know it's easy to bash Columbus, and some of that history is being a little bit modified, so he wasn't responsible for it all, and maybe not even most of it. But it's, I think, in my reading, research, and study, I've tried to stick to primary sources, like the earlier quote from his a letter that he wrote, where he seemed to be nonchalant about the fact that he could, it was easier for him to get men to take up his cause and come over here by promising them a sex slave and a Native American woman than it was to promise them land. And he would talked about how the people who would go off and find these sex slaves were looking at girls 9 and 10 years old, you know, and kind of spoke nonchalantly about that. So I'm not letting Columbus off the hook, but I'm just letting you know that there are different sides to the story. And this is what I think is significant. This is a firsthand report by Bartolomé de las Casas. We'll talk about him a little bit more. But it shows that it's not just us, and we don't live in the same world. We don't live in the same conceptions of slavery as the Spanish ancestors did. But this was a contemporary Spanish person making this comment, so it was not that nobody recognized an evil was being done. What we committed in the Indies stands out among the most unpardonable offenses ever committed against God and mankind, and this trade in Taino slaves as one of the most unjust, evil, and cruel among them. So that was our monoculture. It did not last very long. As we pick up the story, we'll get a little bit more about what does extinct mean, because the only reason to mention is not to bash ourselves or to think badly about our European ancestry, but is to understand and know and respond intelligently to actual history and the fact that we no longer have a very beautiful culture that once existed. I also say we have to temper this by a lot of Puerto Ricans particularly are resisting this urge to talk about extinction because they're considering themselves Taino. And the majority of Puerto Ricans do have a very high percentage of Taino, what they call maternal mitochondria, I guess, in their blood. So no one has been able to prove that they are pure Taino, but there are ways in which the culture lives on, and we will get into that a little bit. But that will have to wait for next class time. Again, thank you